In the remote and whispering valleys of Cevo, where the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains cast long shadows over the town, an event unfolded in May 2008 that would etch itself into the history of the quiet village forever. The evening seemed deceptively peaceful, with the warm glow of the setting sun retreating behind the hills, bathing the cobblestone streets in a golden haze. But beneath this placid facade, something far more sinister was at play. Vlad Taneski, a man driven by a long festering hatred, had set the final pieces of his grotesque puzzle in place. His plan, years in the making, was about to reach its terrifying climax. Sana Tolosa, a woman like any other in Cevo, moved through the streets that night, oblivious to the fact that she had been cast as the final player in Taneski's dark performance. Her hurried steps echoed against the stone, propelled by a frantic call that had set her on a desperate path to the hospital, where she believed her son, Zoran, was in peril. Her heart raced as she clutched her phone, the frantic pace of her pulse matching the confusion in her mind. Little did she know, this supposed emergency was a fabrication, a carefully constructed lie woven by Taneski himself, a man whose thirst for control and vengeance had consumed him to the core. Zoran, a boy caught in the crossfire of Taneski's malevolent game, found himself bewildered by the events of the night. His mother's desperation was palpable, and he could do little to ease her panic. It was exactly as Taneski had intended. He had orchestrated this storm of confusion, his cruelty finding satisfaction in watching a family torn apart by his lies. Sana's terror, her frantic rush to the hospital, was nothing more than another thread in the intricate tapestry of Taneski's revenge, a revenge so meticulously planned that it left no room for mercy. The chaos he inflicted wasn't a byproduct, it was the very goal of his actions. But Sana was not the first to suffer under Taneski's twisted hand. Her plight was only the latest in a series of horrors that had begun years earlier. In 2005, Mitra Simjanosa had been his first victim, unknowingly falling into the cruel machinations of a man whose mind had been poisoned by grief and rage. Then in 2007, Luit Lacosa had met a similarly grim fate. Each woman had been selected not for who they were, but for what they represented, a manifestation of Taneski's unresolved fury toward his deceased mother. These women were not random victims. They were symbols, carefully chosen reflections of his inner torment. In their suffering, he saw a way to unleash his pain upon the world, to make others feel the sting of the wounds he could never heal. Vlad Taneski was not content to simply murder. His pleasure lay in the manipulation of reality itself. In Cevo, a town so small that its inhabitants rarely questioned what they were told, Taneski found it easy to play the puppet master. The stories he spun were accepted without hesitation. He was the weaver of nightmares, bending the narrative to suit his desires, watching with perverse delight as the town believed every word. Each lie, each twisted version of the truth only added to his power. It was not just the lives he took that mattered to him, but the way he controlled how those lives were perceived. He became the author of Cevo's history, one dark chapter at a time, and yet even the most meticulous plans can unravel. Taneski's came undone with a single, unforeseen twist. A phone call, meant to boast of his cleverness, became the beginning of his downfall. His editor, a man who had unknowingly been complicit in disseminating Taneski's falsehoods, received the call that would set the wheels of justice in motion. For the first time, the man who had always been the hunter became the prey. The police closed in. and Taneski, so used to being the one in control, found himself trapped in the very web he had spun. He had manipulated others for years, but now the strings of his own deceit tightened around him, and there was no escape. The once confident and calculating Taneski now found himself in a cold, damp jail cell, stripped of the power he had wielded for so long. The town, once oblivious to the evil lurking in its midst, began to piece together the horrors that had unfolded over the years. The truth emerged slowly, like a shadow creeping across the land as the sun set. Taneski's carefully constructed facade crumbled, and with it, the lies that had kept Cevo in the dark. His crimes, once hidden behind layers of deception, were laid bare for all to see. But even in this moment of exposure, there was a sense of incompleteness, as though the full extent of Taneski's darkness could never truly be understood. And then, in the most fitting of endings, Taneski met a fate as mysterious as the lives he had taken. Within the confines of his cell, in the dead of night, he died suddenly and without explanation. The details of his death were murky, and speculation swirled around Cevo like the mountain mists that obscured the valley. Some said it was suicide, others believed it was something more sinister. Perhaps it was the weight of his own guilt that finally crushed him, or maybe the ghosts of his victims had come to claim their revenge. Whatever the truth, Taneski's death marked the final chapter in a story that had held Cevo in its grip for years. But even in death, Vlad Taneski's presence lingered. Cevo, once a peaceful and unremarkable town, now carried the heavy burden of his legacy. His story became part of the town's identity, a ghost that haunted its streets and whispered through its alleys. The families of his victims, the people who had once trusted him, could never forget the horrors he had wrought. Every May, as the anniversary of his final crime approached, the town would fall into a somber silence, remembering the terror that had gripped them and the man who had turned their lives upside down. And so the name Vlad Taneski became synonymous with Cevo's darkest days. A man whose thirst for vengeance consumed not only his victims, but also the very soul of the town. His story, one of cruelty, manipulation, and madness, would be told for generations, a chilling reminder of the evil that can lurk behind even the most ordinary of facades. The mountains that loomed over Cevo stood as silent witnesses to the tragedy, their jagged peaks casting long shadows over a town that would never again know peace.